Welcome back to the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations base for historical military wargaming. I am your host, Risky Jim, and today we are back for part 2 of our 20mm game of Force on Force set in the Second Battle of Fallujah during the Iraq War, November of 2004. Now, first of all, I want to thank everybody for the amazing response we had to part 1 of our video. Link is in the description below. Check out the link if you haven't seen part 1 of this video so far, so that you can see how this tabletop game has gone so far and how our Iraqi insurgents and our US Marines have gotten to this juncture. Now, in part 1 of this video, we did talk briefly about the Second Battle of Fallujah, its place in the Sunni Triangle, how it was a stronghold for the insurgency against the American occupation forces in Iraq at this time, and how we basically just had to encircle the place and clean it out once and for all. We talk about all the different units involved. We talk about how this was probably one of the most serious single engagements of the Iraq War. I'm assuming people who say this are discounting the original Iraqi freedom invasion in March of 2003 itself. Once you get past the actual invasion, this is probably one of the biggest single engagements in the Iraq War. Now, in a game like Force on Force by Ambush Alley Games and Osprey Publishing, you're only doing a very, very small slice of a pretty large engagement. But long story short, take your first shot. What we're looking at is a full Marine rifle squad, so that's 3 fire teams of 4, each led by a corporal, along with a 13th man, that is the sergeant squad leader. There's been a Navy corpsman attached to the squad, and along with 2 M1114 up-armored 50 caliber armed Humvees, one driven by the company gunnery, this I should say is Kilo Company 3-5 Marines, and one by a platoon staff sergeant. There's a Lance Corporal and a PFC driver in those Humvees, respectively. Their mission is to reach the site of a U.S. Marine Corps M1A1 Abrams tank. Marines did still have Abrams tanks back in these days, and there were some Marine tanks engaged in Second Fallujah, again, November 2004. One of them has hit an IED, 2 of the crewmen have been badly injured, and this squad of Marines, and again, their attached Humvees and Navy Corpsman support are supposed to get to that site, get the casualties out of there, and frag the tank before insurgents can get to the tank, strip it for parts, strip it for electronics, and perhaps most ominously, strip it for its remaining 120mm ammunition it can use to manufacture more IEDs. Fallujah was an absolute honeycomb of IED factories. This is one of the reasons why Operation Phantom Fury was launched to sort of clean this place out. But like I said, all of the details as well as the first half of the game are in part 1 of this video, link in the description. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. For now, I've blathered on long enough. We have rounds down range and Marines have been hit. Let's get back to the second half of this game and see where we wind up. We start off on the Marine right wing where, yeah, they've got a lot of problems. This whole new batch of insurgents has emerged from a hotspot. That's one of the insurgency reinforcement mechanics that we see in Force on Force. There's an RPG gunner there. He's trying to put another RPG into this Humvee, driven by the gunnery sergeant of Kilo Company 3rd Battalion 5th Marines. Yeah, I said another RPG. That Humvee has already taken 1 RPG in part 1 of this video. Luckily, it only blew off that 50 cal. I don't know how much longer that incredible luck is going to hold. For a Humvee to take a direct hit from an RPG and survive, that's pretty good. Whether or not that Humvee makes it or not is going to largely depend on this fire team of Marines on the opposite street corner. So you saw where the fire team was, there's the Humvee and there's the insurgents. There's this little 3-way firefight going on there right over the roof of that DHL truck. Now, as it turns out, that Humvee is going to take a second rocket, and believe it or not, it's going to survive again. Except now it is a mission kill because it has lost its engine and it's lost its 50 caliber machine gun. The gunny is still in the Humvee. The Lance Corporal has bailed out, and the Lance Corporal is now wounded. Again, how that Humvee is still there is quite beyond me. So 2 of the guys from that rooftop fire team fired over to the right to try to save that Humvee. Ron has his other 2 guys, I think the Corporal and the Saw Gunner, taking some long-range fire over the M1. He's trying to engage that wall, that line of insurgents behind that low wall there. He has now scored a hit. So you roll your attack dice. It's 2d8 for the Saw, 1d10 for the Corporal. Again, those are troop quality numbers. He scored a hit. We see which one of the insurgents he's hit. We got to be careful here and make sure we hit the right insurgent because there are some leaders there. Here is the objective of the game. The Marine battle tank that was knocked out of commission by an Iraqi IED. Now it's a 4-man tank. 2 of the crew are considered seriously injured. This all happens before the game. This is part of the Marine mission requirements. The Marines have to get the Navy corpsman to this part of the table where he can stabilize and evacuate the 2 wounded tank crewmen. On top of that, they have to make a troop quality check, frag the tank again before it falls into enemy hands. So we have the corpsman there, we have the Marine sergeant squad leader there, and we have a corporal with his whole fire team there. That's the corporal himself, the saw gunner, the grenadier, and the A gunner assistant. So there's a lot of people piled up in there. Some of the people sent to rescue the casualties have now become casualties themselves. They've come under fire by an Iraqi technical, which has now been wrecked by counterfire from a different Marine fire team. But nevertheless, those casualties are now in place, and the corpsman has to stabilize and evacuate them as well. The Marines can also try to stabilize and evacuate a casualty. It's just a lot tougher for them because they are, not medics. I should say corpsmen. So we see here with this dice in this dice tray here, there's still some fire flying back and forth between, again, the insurgents behind that wall. There's some more insurgents on a building just above frame. You can't quite see them. And Marines that are, again, taking cover behind that tank. And there's another fire team. The fire team that's sort of been saving the day so far are the ones that look like they're on the roof of that brick building. They're not really on the roof. They're inside the building by those windows. All right, finally that Humvee ran out of gas. So far in part 1, the early part of part 2 of this video, the Marines have been rolling terrible on reaction checks. How the Marines keep losing those quality checks, even though they have much better dice, they're usually rolling D10s against D6s, is beyond me. But once the Humvees take hits, it's like the RPGs are taking them apart one headlight at a time. I don't know how they've been surviving this long, but nevertheless, both Humvees are now knocked out. One was taken out by this technical right before this technical itself was taken out. And again, we saw that first Humvee flipped over. Gunny did survive, however, but that Humvee's pretty much out of gas. You see here how absolutely quickly casualties pile up among the insurgents. They have basically, I'm literally just picking them off the table here, they basically have no first aid system in place. This is where force on force gets very asymmetrical with different conditions and different rules for the regular force and the irregular force, or the free rule player and the insurgent player. These insurgents get hit, they pretty much have to roll a 6 on a d6 to stay in the fight at all. And that's where they're literally slapping some cotton on their wound and toughing it out. Here we are in the first aid phase of the Marine turn. And again, how casualties are handled, I feel, is another great mechanic in the force on force system. So, say a figure gets hit in the various exchanges of fire or reactions or counter reactions, what have you. Okay, he's now a casualty. He is knocked out for the rest of this turn. How badly he's been hit, no one's going to know, including him himself, until the end of the turn. Beginning of next turn, you start making these first aid checks, which are affected by body armor, how close you are to a corpsman, things like that. Unfortunately, this Marine over here on the left, he's not close to a corpsman, and he rolled pretty badly, slips into shock, and he's no longer with us. I think that's the first Marine fatality of the game. Conversely, that saw gunner is okay. He rolls a 6, which is a good save whether or not you're close to a corpsman or not. So his corporal got to him, opened up his body armor. Yeah, he's bleeding and he's got a cool scar, but hey, he's okay. The score so far is 25-17. The insurgents are winning, and here's some more bad news for the Marines. Some more insurgents have erupted out of that hotspot right at the feet of that beleaguered fire team that has already suffered some casualties, including a fatality. So there are always 5 hotspots on a force-on-force table. And when the insurgents get reinforcements, the insurgency level in this game, I made it very high, 5 out of 6. Call me crazy, I think the insurgency level during Second Battle of Fallujah was rather high. If they get reinforcements, which they almost always do, you roll a d6 to see which hotspot they arrive through. There are 5 hotspots, you roll a d6. Clearly, the number on the dice indicates which hotspot the new reinforcements arrive through. If you get a 6, the insurgent player gets to choose. So Mark rolled a 6 and is now being very aggressive and going after that wounded fire team. Alright, so there's going to be a very, very intense little firefight inside this building. So So how force on force kind of handles this is you get obviously a cover bonus for being in a building. Both sides are inside the building, so there's going to be internal walls, stairwells, things like that, features inside the building. So pretty much everybody gets the cover bonus for being inside the building. The good news for the Marines is they have another fire team that's now in that building across the street that can sort of put this new group of insurgents in a little bit of a crossfire and hopefully clean them out before the insurgents get to shoot at the Marines. Again, force on force, very asymmetrical game. The regular forces player in a asymmetrical engagement like this always wins initiative. There literally isn't an initiative phase. So the insurgents erupted, they have to withstand the fire of two Marine rifle teams, pretty much point blank, two Marine fire teams in a crossfire. I don't like their chances, I'll be perfectly frank, but the way the Marines are rolling this game, they might actually live a little longer. And if any of them are left, they're then going to fire into the Marine rifle team that's pretty much right next to them, that already has casualties. They've also been joined by the gunny and the Lance Corporal out of that wrecked Humvee. So yeah, it's going to get really intense very, very quickly if the Marines don't manage to completely take out this insurgent team that just erupted out of that hotspot. So they've already succeeded in doing 2 hits. We are going to now roll randomly to see which figures have been hit within that group. Often it doesn't matter, but for the insurgents it does, because these guys are carrying some special weapons and there's a leader in there. So we have to be sure which insurgent we hit. Alright, so there's been a lot of casualties there. You see every single one of those insurgents does have almost every single one of them has a casualty counter placed on them. We don't know if they're dead. They probably are, because again, insurgents don't really have corpsmen or medics. They don't have first aid kits or first aid training. The only way they can survive being hit is if they manage to slap a little bit of narcotics on their wound and they can kind of, say a prayer and tough it out. But by and large, if an insurgent has been hit, it may not be a fatality, but if an insurgent has been hit, his basic attitude, if he's still breathing, again, not wearing body armor, no medics, no medical first aid kits, no medic training, nothing like that. If he's been hit and survives, his general attitude is the hell with this. I've done my bit for today, and I'm out of here. So they tend to evaporate very quickly when hit. The problem is finding them, fixing them, and putting that steel on target. Here we are on the northern end of the battlefield, where some of Mark's insurgents have gotten a little aggressive and paid a pretty steep price for it. So we had 2 groups of insurgents, 6 figures each, a total of 12, move straight up that street and try to get an angle around the corner of that building, that brick building you see there at your lower left. You see there's only 6 figures left out of the original 12. Where did the other 6 figures go? Well, they're technically still there. They're just, bleeding to death in the street, because those Marines there on the 2nd floor of that brick building, they were in those windows just above that blue and white awning, engaged against those insurgents behind the low wall there. However, they saw that they were being outflanked, doubled back through the building, and sorted out the problem. So 2nd floor window, 3 M4 automatic carbines, and an M249 squad automatic weapon. That's a 200-round box of 5.56 NATO in a belted box at a range of about 20 feet from above, while you're standing there in the middle of the street without any cover. Well, long story short, take your second shot, you're going to have a really bad day. Just ask those insurgents, they'll tell you all about it. It was a good move for the insurgents, because once they get a flank shot on that Humvee with wounded Marines in it, they still might do a lot of damage. They just lost 6 figures for the privilege. So, like we were saying before, these insurgents, once they get fixed and they start taking, actual direct fire, they tend to evaporate very quickly. These 6 insurgents, 4 of them were wounded. The 2 that weren't did manage to inflict some casualties on Corporal's fire team over there to the right. But then the Corporal's fire team then counter-reacted and pretty much hit all of them. Not one of them rolled 6 on their so-called caveman cot roll. This is pretty much where they're slapping some narcotics on their wound. That's the limit of their first aid. No body armor, no first aid, no medics, no corpsmen, nothing like that. Once they get hit, they tend to say, even if they're not physically dead, like I was saying before, they're pretty much, they've done enough for the cause, and they leave. So either way, they get eliminated as figures. The problem is the Marines have also taken some additional casualties. Again, there was a brisk engagement within the confines of that little warehouse building there. We're going to have to figure that out in just a second. But for now, we're going to straighten out the casualties back here by this Humvee first. We have one of the wounded tank crewmen that did manage to escape the tank. He did take a wound running across that courtyard. How he survived, I don't know. But he's no longer within radius of the corpsman. Nevertheless, he rolls a 6, and he's okay. So, hey, tactics maybe weren't the best, but the die rolling will make up for it sometimes. All right, over here, here's where tactics did work out. Honestly, I'm making fun, but Ron did make the right decision here. There are more casualties here. He redeployed, he shifted his corpsmen to get them into the radius of the corpsman. So if you're within the radius of the corpsman, which I think is a double dash, so troop quality 8 for the corpsman, I think it's 16 inches. You've seen us measure it a couple times there. If they're within 16 inches of the corpsman, they get a different table to roll on, which is much more beneficial to the Marine casualties. So that first Lance Corporal A gunner there, the saw gunner, he's okay. The problem here is Gunny and his Lance Corporal driver. These were the two guys that were in that wrecked Humvee. They've now fallen back across the street and linked up with the remains of this Marine fire team here. They've each taken a light wound, and now they take another light wound, so now they're each going to have a serious wound. Right, so here is the company Gunny and his Lance Corporal driver, both with serious wound counters on their figures. So what Ron is going to start doing now is evacuating his casualties. This is actually a really smart move on his part. The Marine player, or really any regular forces player in these counterinsurgency asymmetrical games, you really have to take care of your casualties. It doesn't just behoove you. You had better do it. So how you do it is, again, it can also be for your serious wounds and even your fatalities. You don't want to leave your dead on the table because of morale reasons, intelligence reasons, camaraderie reasons, no man left behind, that kind of stuff. How you evacuate your serious and fatalities off the table, you invest an able-bodied figure, and he carries them back either off the table edge or to a designated casualty evacuation area. You really have to do this, because if you don't, the insurgents in this scenario get 5 points for a seriously wounded Marine and 10 points for a fatality. And all it takes is one more light wound on a serious wound to turn the serious wound into a fatality. So you can win this game as the Marine player taking plenty of serious wounds. You start taking fatalities, that's not going to go so well. So for really any regular forces player, it's not just a good idea, it's a requirement. You have to take care of your casualties. The Marines, having completed their mission, at least to the greatest extent to which they will be able, are now withdrawing from the table. In fact, the Marine players had kind of conceded the game. I encourage them to please not do this and to at least play the first half of turn 5. Because in these counterinsurgency asymmetrical, regular versus irregular games, the regular force player always gets initiative. There's not even a roll for it. So, because you get to move and shoot in this game, the Marines can actually do their withdrawal, but under a hail of covering fire that can not only cover their withdrawal, but knock down a lot more insurgents, and maybe close the gap on points. Because right now, the Marines are honestly losing on points. But if they can kill enough insurgents in their withdrawal, they can close the gap, maybe get to a draw, or maybe even an ugly win. It's really just going to come down to the math, whether or not they can kill enough insurgents to win enough victory points to sort of, again, close that score gap. So they knock down 3 more. Oops, I was putting in the wrong column there. So the score for the Marines is now 28 plus 3. It's 31 versus the insurgent score of 35. Okay, so the Marines still lost, but I'd rather have them lose by 4 points than have them lose by 7 points. So there we go. There is the end of the game, halfway through turn 5. We were going all the way to turn 6, but now the Marines have broken off. It was a pretty solid game. And again, by making proper use of the turn sequence, and especially this sort of fire and withdrawal mechanic, the Marines are able to, close the gap a little bit, at least make it a little bit more of a palatable result. Hey, just because I wanted to put them on the table, we have air support from the Air Force and a Black Hawk from 2-7 Cavalry on the table to help out with the withdrawal. Here are the final results on the table. Congratulations to all our players, especially since this was your first time playing in the Force on Force system. That's going to be Mark and Tom on the Insurgent side, and Steve and Ron on the Marine side. So the Air Force finally decided to show up, and we have the A-10 Warthog doing what's called a show of force maneuver. Some more on that later. And that pretty much is the narrative reason the battle ends when it does. The Insurgents are not hanging around for that stuff. On to our more detailed results here. We see that first Marine fire team on the Marine right wing. Sadly, the corporal in charge of this fire team has suffered a fatality. One of the Marines that went in there with him is not coming back with him, or at least not coming back with him the way he wanted to. So yeah, not such hot news for the Marines. We also have Company Gunny, Kilo Company 3-5 Marines is now seriously wounded. He's definitely going to retire now, along with his Lance Corporal driver. Here on the Sitrep podcast, we actually have members of our team that were deployed in Iraq. For all I know, they might know people who were actually deployed in Second Fallujah. So although this is a game, and of course we're here just to have fun, we do take this kind of subject matter a little bit more seriously. You'll notice there were no funny video jokey bits in this battle report. It's still a game, but we do it a little bit more seriously. Here in the center, we have some better news for the Marines. Their squad leader and attached corpsman came through okay. Second fire team is pretty much unscathed, even though some of them were hit. But because they were right next to the corpsman, they got to roll on the enhanced first aid table, which means basically they get a 5 or a 6 on a D6 instead of just a 6 for that wound to pretty much just be a non-issue. And that combined with some good dice rolling, yeah, they came through all right. Third fire team, definitely the MVPs. They did a heck of a lot of damage, took no damage in return. Not so much with the crippled tank crew. So in this game, this tank crew started off with 2 figures and 2 seriously wounded counters. Sadly, you see now that one of those serious wound counters has been converted to a fatality. So the wounded man was hit by an insurgent rifleman, and all it takes is one more hit on a seriously wounded figure to pretty much turn him into a fatality. As the insurgent player, often the secret is to play dirty. Shooting at wounded men is kind of a shitty thing to do, but it's the only way you're going to defeat a military that has stealth bombers, cruise missiles, drones, and nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. You're not going to beat that with your daddy's AK and a Molotov cocktail, especially when the A-10 Warthog flies over the field with a show of force. Why he didn't just bomb and strafe and missile the whole neighborhood into dust before the battle even started? Again, there are civilians here you're trying to get on your side. There's wounded Marine tankers and Marine riflemen that are now in close engagement range with the enemy. So you fly low and slow over the battlefield, you pour a bunch of fuel in your afterburners, maybe even fire off some countermeasures, you scare the crap out of everybody, the insurgents disengage, and nobody is hurt. That's the actual tactic that's used in situations like this, and Force on Force naturally does have a rule for it. That's how we chose to end the game. Speaking of which, this is going to wrap up our look at Second Fallujah in 20mm Force on Force. Again, great result. Narrow Marine loss, I'm sorry to say. Nevertheless, well-fought game by everybody at the table. Well, folks, there you have it. It pains me to say it, and my chesty puller forgive me, but the Marine Corps has technically lost this game. As we see so often in these modern, asymmetric, non-linear, non-kinetic operations, although I'd hardly call Fallujah a non-kinetic operation, but in these asymmetric engagements, it's very, very possible for the free world player, or even the regular forces player, to win the battle but lose the game. You've got to keep a very, very close eye on your casualties, on your collateral damage, on your casualty evacuation, rules of engagement, hitting civilians, all this other stuff. All these factors that the insurgent player doesn't give a rat's ass about. That's literally the essence of nonlinear, or more specifically, asymmetric warfare. A lot of the rules in Force on Force, one of the reasons I love the system so much, is that it sort of presents 2 sets of rules, one for the regular forces player and one for the insurgent. And what's legal for one team is literally an illegal move for the other side. And the winner is often the player that gets the other person to play their game, as opposed to vice versa. Never, ever, ever fight the enemy's war. As far as this game goes, again, it was everybody's first time with the system. It's only the 5th or 6th time I've actually run a Force on Force game, So I can't point too many fingers at dramatic mistakes that were made. The insurgent players didn't really make the best use of their hidden unit mechanics. The insurgent player can declare a unit hidden with a true quality check, and thus prevent fire even from coming at them. The Marines would then have to spot them with a counter true quality check. The problem is the range for the Marine spotting check is less than the ambush range for the insurgent check, so the insurgents will always get the first shot. Again, it was everybody's first time with the system. Conversely, the Marines didn't really make the best use of their Overwatch mechanic. Again, the Overwatch mechanic is something that the regular forces can do that the insurgents can't, and the insurgent hidden rules are something the insurgents can do and the regular forces can't. So again, this is more of that great force-on-force rule structure that literally presents two different rule systems to the two sides and challenges you to make the other guy fight your war. But all in all, it was a great game. It came down to a pretty close finish. I was actually pretty happy with the result. I do hope to be running Force on Force again at Das Creek House, home of South Florida Miniatures Gaming Club, so keep an eye out for that in the future. It won't be everybody's first time with the game the second time around, so maybe it'll run a little bit more smoothly. For now, this is Risky and Jim with the Sitrep podcast. We are rounds complete, and as always, Tango Mike for watching.